But now I want to talk about Evanston rats. Larry Heaney, I'm thrilled to have him. He is the Negaunee Curator of Mammals at the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. He teaches and advises students at the University of Chicago and University of the Philippines, and is a research fellow at the Philippine National Museum of Natural History. His research is focused on the natural history, taxonomy, and conservation of small mammals in the midwestern US and in the Philippines, where he and his collaborators have discovered and formally described over 50 previously unknown species of mammals. He's also lived in Evanston for 29 years and is our go-to person when somebody finds a bat. So, Larry, thank you so much for coming. You can come up and talk.
Hey, thank you. So I guess I should point out one additional thing that's part of my job at the museum. For about 25 years, I have been the co-chair of the museum's pest committee. And so that has gotten me into dealing with a lot of issues with pest rodents, including house mice and brown rats. Yeah, it just, you know how things go. They snowball over time. So I've gotten really interested in these questions about how can we control what is clearly a very serious problem with rats throughout the Chicago region, including Evanston. I live about 4 blocks south of the playing fields at Robert Crown. That neighborhood where my wife and I walk our dog regularly, where I drive the alleyway getting to my garage, I see rats all the time. And walking around town, I have learned to recognize rat burrows, and there are lots of them. So there's no question that this is a very real problem from many perspectives. What I want to do is spend part of my time this evening talking about the biology of the rats and why that makes it so. The animal that we're talking about, just to be clear, is the scientific name is Rattus norvegicus. It is known sometimes as the brown rat. That's the usual English common name used for them. They are sometimes referred to as the Norway rat. They are not from Norway. They were named by a Swede. So, but this is the species that's here. There are other species of rats that are urban and agricultural pest rats in other parts of the world. This one is in the United States, tends to be the most common one. When you get down into the more southerly parts of the United States, a species that is part of the Rattus group is the more common one. But here in Chicago, they're all Rattus norvegicus, the brown rat. So these animals are among probably the longest standing pests of humans. By the time that humans developed agriculture in perhaps Turkey and adjacent parts of Central Asia, there were members of this species living with people and making use of the food that they were producing. 8,000 years, probably longer. They've been living with us for a long, long time. There has been intense selection on them to remove them. People don't want to have rats around. And so they work very, very hard at trying to kill them. So the result of that has been intense selection. The ones that somehow managed to avoid being killed were the ones that reproduced. And to the extent that their behaviors and their physiology was successful, that's what was passed on to the next generation. So just the standard kind of natural selection, except being imposed in this case largely by humans on the rats. So some basic biology here. Um, so I know that sometimes they get very large. Most of the time, they don't quite make it to the size of an adult gray squirrel or the weight of an adult gray squirrel. They can look enormous when you're out there at night with them, but yeah, that's really rare. For the most part, they're in the range of 400 to 600 grams, so smaller than the gray squirrels here in Evanston. Um, uh, the young of this species leave the nest at a pretty early age. They weigh typically in the range of 40 to 60 grams. That's smaller than a chipmunk. So they're more or less still babies when they leave the nest and are out there on their own. One of the things that characterizes this species is that they reproduce at a phenomenal level. The adult females will produce anywhere from 3 to 9 young per litter, sometimes 12, and occasionally even more than that. So a very, very large litter size. And they'll have anywhere from 4 to 6 litters per year, sometimes more. So it is typical for a single adult female to produce anywhere from 20 to 50 babies in a year. That's really crucial to the problem that we have with them. They reproduce extremely rapidly. And the number of babies in a given litter and the number of litters per year is very, very heavily influenced by the nutritional condition of the female. The more food she has, the more rapidly she produces new litters and the larger the litter size. So there have been estimates of under ideal circumstances. Unlimited food, one female on the 1st of January gives birth to a large litter. At the end of the year, if that keeps going and all of her female offspring produce young, you can have more than 1,000 rats. Okay, second issue, they're smart. They've learned how to deal with us. So when a new item appears in the environment, the adult rats don't go to it. They wait for days to see what happens. So if you put out grass seed, they'll eventually go and eat the grass seed. Not for a while. Instead, what happens is those babies that have been kicked out of the nest, when they're smaller than a chipmunk, they're hungry. They're on their own. They don't know how things work. They're not very smart. So they're the ones that go and eat whatever it is. If the adults watch. If they get caught in a trap, the adults will never go near that kind of trap. If the babies eat something and die, the adults will not eat it. So they're producing their own testing system, and they produce so many babies that the population can sustain that kind of loss. Kind of an ugly system, but it's the one that has worked for them very, very, very well. So what are the options for controlling rats that have been under discussion recently? So I'm going to talk about each one of these in order, but just to give you a heads up, of course, one of the ones of great concern is poison bait. How well does that work? What are the limitations on its success? What about semi-feral cats, outdoors cats? What impact do they have on populations of rats? What about using dry ice or liquid nitrogen to go to a nesting site and without having to dig the whole thing out, pump gas down into the burrow system, and remove the oxygen, replace the oxygen so that the animals asphyxiate. Removing the places where they live, harborage is the term that's often used, is another option. Maybe we can just not give them any place to nest. And we can eliminate food sources or reduce food sources. So those are the primary ones that I want to address here. Are people able to hear me? Is that working? Okay, all right. I'll continue to try to lean over the microphone. Yeah, okay. All right, great. Okay, so poison bait is one that is very familiar to most of us. So the photographs that I'm going to show you, with a couple of exceptions, are ones that I took in the alleyway behind my house. So these are ones, and this was at the end of September, beginning of October last fall. So these are things that are in frequent usage. You've probably seen these black plastic boxes around town. So inside those black boxes, often there is a poison bait. They are often colored, some bright, odd-looking color, often blue. I gather that that's intended to alert people to the fact that this is a strange thing that they shouldn't be fooling around with. So the bait is put into the boxes so that the rats will come and eat it. Well, all right. What happens is that the babies go and eat it. It will kill some of the babies, no question. The babies then leave the immediate vicinity of the bait box and die. The adults see that, they associate the death of the baby with the poison bait, and they will not go near it. So the result of that is something of a reduction in the population of the rats, but it's very temporary. And I've been living in Evanston for 30 years now, and there have been poison bait boxes out during that entire time, and there are just as many rats now as ever. Clearly, it's not being effective. Another aspect of that is that, as has been very clearly documented at this point, the rats do develop over time, they develop resistance to the poison. The ones that have some sort of genetic combination that make them less vulnerable to the poison are the ones that survive and reproduce. And so those genes are passed on to the next generation. Over time, that process produces animals that are resistant to a particular type of poison bait. And so we get into the situation where the poison bait has to be reformulated periodically in order for it to be effective at all. Now, of course, one of the concerns that we have is that that poison bait can be eaten by other things. So chipmunks, some of the little native deer mice that are common in Evanston will eat the bait. They die from it. Sometimes they are then in turn eaten by other things, whether it's a raptor or a fox or a coyote or something else. This happens relatively frequently. The studies that have been done find that there is at least a low level of these rat poisons, these toxins, in many of the animals that are sampled in the Chicago area, the predators that are present here. So spillover effects. I'm not going to go into that in any sort of detail. So poison bait, does it work? Well, to a limited degree, for a limited time, in a specific situation, it may reduce the population some. However, it's not a permanent fix because they evolve resistance, and it rarely kills the adults. And they just make more babies. Okay, so next option. What about cats? So there is much talk about, there has been much talk in the past about deliberately using cats that are semi-feral, that are They're supplemented with some food so that they will stay in a given area, but not having them be indoor cats. They're outdoor cats. They're out there with the idea that they're going to catch. Sometimes the justification is they're going to catch rats. A couple of other things about these rats. They are the most aggressive mammals I have ever dealt with. Most species of small mammals, including things that have rat as part of the common name, like the pack rats that are out in the western U.S., they're mostly, if you're not mistreating them, they're very docile. They're not aggressive at all. These animals are extremely aggressive. You don't want to mess with one of those rats unless you are really well prepared. That's true for cats too. So what you see in this photograph here is a photo that was published in the Journal of Mammalogy as one of the results from a study that was done in the Baltimore Harbor area by researchers from the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health in the 1980s. So a ways back, one of the nicer studies that's been done. So they were interested in disease transmission from the rats to people in the harbor area. At that time, particularly, it was a very low income area, lots of health problems. And they were trying to find out more about how, in particular, how some of the diseases were being transmitted. So they decided they needed to find out more about the rats that were living in the alleyways. And one of the questions was, well, how effective are the cats that live there in limiting the rat populations? You can see from this photograph that that cat is deliberately looking away from the rat. That's a nice big adult rat. Lots of protein. You'd think the cat might be interested? No way. So these grad students and postdocs, one of whom was a friend of mine, who gathered data, went out in the evenings, running around in the alleyways in the harbor area of Baltimore, chasing after cats when they caught rats, and chasing them fast enough that they would drop the rat to get away from the guys chasing them. So they were able to pick up, this is 22 rats that had been captured by cats, and to compare them to the individual rats that they captured by various means. So if you work really hard, you can catch some of them in some traps. It's really hard. They managed. So they had a pretty good sample size. So what you can see, I hope, from this graph is that the size of the rats that were being captured by the cats ranged from about 25 to 75 grams. Remember, adult rats weigh from 300 to sometimes 700 grams. So the diagram in the upper right corner there shows the size of the rats that they sampled overall. And what you can see is that, yes, indeed, most of the rats were in the range of, 300 to 600 grams. Those are the adults. The ones that the cats were catching were babies. So cats, very rare exceptions, catch babies. So does that have a negative, excuse me, does that have a negative impact on the rat population? Well, sure. You're removing some babies. Does it significantly reduce the overall population of the rats? No. So if you have a neighbor who tells you, well, I have a cat that lives outdoors and it catches rats all the time, ask if you can weigh them. And if there's one that weighs over 100 grams, please send me an email. Very unlikely. They'll catch a lot of babies, and it doesn't have a meaningful impact on rat control. And of course, the other aspect of this is that while the cats are out there, they're catching other things. So here's a photograph of a cat with a bird in its mouth. It's a warbler of some kind. Sorry, I'm not a bird guy. Anyway, so somewhat different issue, but clearly one of great concern. I can add to that as a mammal guy, I also know that they catch and kill chipmunks and flying squirrels. We have flying squirrels living in our backyard here in Evanston. They're in most neighborhoods in Evanston. They're very common. They're just very quiet and they're active only at night after it gets dark. So if you put out a platform feeder about yay high up on the side of a big tree, your odds of having, and you put out some good seed for them, particularly in the wintertime, your odds of getting the flying squirrels coming in regularly are pretty good. They're really cute. We have had cats sit at the base of the tree watching the flying squirrels on our platform. They definitely try to catch them. So they're having an impact on the small mammals. There are estimates that have been made for various parts of the world, various parts of the US. I don't know of specific data about small mammal prey of cats in the Chicago area, but it's a big thing. So at any rate, not great. Okay, what about introducing some sort of a gas into the nest holes of breeding rats? Yes, that works. It does. So if you can find a nest hole that is occupied by a female that has babies and pump the gas down there, it will kill them. The problem is that you have to find the hole and you have to pump the gas in. That takes a lot of work. It's very intensive labor. Under some circumstances where you've got a really dense population of the rats causing a great amount of concern, this may be an effective way to reduce the rat population. There are a couple of problems with it, though. As soon as you stop, rats from the surrounding areas spill back in, and they reoccupy the same burrows, and you end up with the same problem. So in order to really substantially and particularly permanently reduce the rat population, you would have to have a very, very intense effort with people spending a lot of time looking for the rat holes. Because if you miss 1 out of 10 females, it's not going to work. Okay. What about removing harborage, the places where they live? Sure, again, if you can find those places, you dig up those nests, you fill it in with pea gravel or something of the sort that the rats basically can't dig through, concrete, that'll work. Very labor intensive, very localized, and you're subject to the same problems with this tremendous number of rats being produced in neighboring areas, just flooding back in again. Now, another thing that's been suggested as a way to control these is to put out some sort of birth control chemicals in food that the rats will eat to reduce the fertility of the adult females. Again, that's probably something, I haven't seen hard data on it, but I can believe that particularly in a situation where you've got a great concentration, a large rat population, that using that approach might very well have some success. The problem again with that is that if you don't get all the females, and if you don't maintain it constantly, you're just going to have the rats from neighboring areas pouring back in. So again, it's one of those things that may be helpful, particularly in very specific situations, but as a long-term solution for a large area, the size of Evanston, much less to say the size of the city of Chicago, the amount of effort would be tremendous. to actually have it substantially reduce the problem and permanently keep it down would be very, very difficult. So what are we left with at this point? So all of the things that I've just mentioned have some negative impact on rat populations. They all do work to some degree. Some of them are problematic, poison baits and semi-feral cats, because of the damage that they do otherwise. Others, dry ice and that sort of thing, removing harborage, birth control for rats. Yes, those aren't going to have any negative side effects, not that I know of, but they're not significant solutions. They're temporary and they're very labor intensive. So what are we left with? Well, what about eliminating food sources? So end of September, beginning of October this past year, I went out and did a little bit of survey work in my immediate neighborhood. So this is like many of the neighborhoods in Evanston. Along one side of the block that we live on, it's mostly single family homes. Some neighbors out playing football on a nice Saturday morning, afternoon. Anyway, on the other side of the block are 2 to 4 story apartment and condo buildings. So a very mixed neighborhood. So I walked down the alleyway just right behind our house and counted what I could see. Yeah. So you can see from the photograph, this is one of the standard trash bins that we all use, or most of us use. There are big holes that have been chewed in it. The squirrels are doing part of that. The rats are doing part of it. Squirrels, yeah, I kind of like squirrels. Not everybody does, but they're not the same problem that the rats are. So, very, very common problems. Notice the car that's behind that. This is not a low-income neighborhood for the most part. This is a very, very common problem. Yeah, another one. Big hole chewed in the corner of that. Easily accessed by rats. No problem at all. Some of the containers don't have holes, but what I've seen every week is that our pickup is on Monday, trash pickup is on Monday. By Saturday morning, when I drive down the alleyway, many of the bins that don't have holes are overfilled, making it easy for rats to get in and out of there. Even the small dumpsters that are behind the condo buildings and the apartment buildings very frequently have holes in the lids. Again, making access very, very easy. Yeah, just more examples. Here's a bunch that, again, it's a nice neighborhood. Many of the trash receptacles have big holes in them. So I just did a quick count of the small dumpsters that are in the alleyway behind my house. Small sample size, not necessarily representative. All 3 of them had holes in the lid. Out of 30 trash and recycling bins, 10 of them had big holes in them. And some of the others on Saturday morning were, well, like the one that I photographed that was overfull, that they would be able to just climb in and out without having a hole. So, so these are animals that aren't readily controlled in any fashion. They have lived with us for at least 8,000 years, and they're good at it. They reproduce like crazy, and they're very smart. The adults are very cautious. They're very, very smart. They don't go to new things in their environment until they have had time to reach the point of feeling confident that it's safe for them to take advantage of it. So my own conclusion is that the only effective way to control rats is to control the food sources. Everything else that I'm familiar with is either not very effective or temporary or also sometimes problematic. Right now, I'm afraid that Evanston alleys are basically rat cafeterias. There is unlimited food. And as long as there's unlimited food, we're going to have rats. If you go in and you remove 90% of the babies, that means that there are fewer individuals eating the food, which means there's more food for the adult females, which means that they reproduce faster. I think the only way that we're going to control rats here and anywhere else is by making substantial changes that make it very, very difficult for the rats to have access to, particularly to food trash. Okay, that's all I have to say. I would be happy to take questions. Yes. Sorry.
In order for people on Zoom to hear us, we're going to have to use the microphone. So let me just get around to you.
Okay. I live in a neighborhood in South Evanston, and I often walk the alleys to go up street and so forth. And I see lots of the black boxes around. They were black, all black.
Yep.
And I have yet to see a single one looked at. I mean, this has been 5 years. I have never seen one of those boxes being investigated by anybody. So I don't know if there's any point to them at all. The broken garbage cans or recycling cans and so forth, I agree that that's, you see lots of holes, but most of the time, not always, the top is the thing. They gnaw through the top or around the corner or something. And it's probably an expensive thing to throw the whole thing out and have to replace that garbage can. But if they'd work on a different system where we could at least replace the top, just replace the top, keep the bottom, and somehow it'll require a different model, but that would be another a possibility. But I do think I kind of agree with you. I have to focus on that because black boxes are useless and unsightly, I might add.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. So I'm not an economist. I'm not a city manager. I'm just a mammologist. It does seem to me that it would be worth investigating. Choose an area somewhere where there are serious rat problems and replace all of the receptacle bin lids with metal and see what happens. In the long run, it might be a cheaper solution than paying people to go out and try to control them in other ways. I don't know. That's something that perhaps deserves serious consideration. Okay.
So I'll ask some questions from
Okay.
Zoom. First of all, somebody right away asked if a metal trash can would work, and you've kind of discussed that part.
Yeah, so rats will chew through metal given enough time, but it takes a long time. My guess is that if they don't have access to food because a new metal lid has been put in place, they're going to either starve or go away, both of which is what we really want.
It makes me think of the bear-proof garbage cans you can see in national parks.
Yes.
And they spend some money on those, and I hope that
It's been very effective. Yep.
We have another person on the Zoom audience who says that she can confirm that controlling food works. And she says also that the city will replace the top. Call 311, and she said she's done it for everyone in her alley. Other question, would twice a week trash pickup help?
It depends. If there continue to be holes in many of the trash receptacles, no, because they're just gonna climb further down in.
And here's another question, moving a little further afield, but I think it's key for some of us here. Does feeding birds feed rats too? What does this mean for bird feeders?
Yes. Again, not nearly as much of a bird person as many others are. So I have been told that having birds seed out on the ground where rats can easily get to it can be a source of food for them. So the advice that I've heard, and probably others here would be able to tell you more about this, is put the food out in the morning, put seed out in the morning, a limited amount, not more than the birds are going to eat during the daytime, so that there's nothing out there at night. Beyond that, I'm sure there are other things that can be done. I'm a mammal guy.
We had one other comment that the metal trash cans, because of weight, there's only one person handling the garbage pickup.
Yeah.
That's a problem for having.
Well, when I
full
was a
metal
kid,
trash cans.
we all had those, those old zinc-coated metal round trash cans with a puff lid on top, and we dealt with it. Again, that's outside of my area of special knowledge, so I probably shouldn't say anymore. Yes. Back here.
Gonna get the,
Well, okay.
let me go.
We'll get to everybody.
You mentioned putting the bird seed away at night. Do the rats only come out at night? The ones that I've seen under my feet, or they've been there during the day?
They will sometimes be active during the day. They're principally out at night.
They are.
So if you're seeing them in the daytime, you've got a lot of rats.
Don't-
Sorry. Yes.
So I have been told that they don't like the smell of mint. Do you know whether that's accurate or not?
I don't. Mint isn't eaten by very many things. Many of the things that we use as spices, the plants produce those compounds as insecticides. If you only eat a little bit of it, it's, makes your food taste good. If you eat a lot of it, it can be a real problem.
Thank you very much. So I don't, other than metal trash cans, I don't see humans changing. I have a dog. I walk the alleys all the time. And I see everything you're seeing, probably, well, everything you're seeing. So what if we do nothing? What happens? What is it about the rats? They
Yeah.
carry disease.
They do carry disease. That's been studied for many years now, a variety of unpleasant things. They do a lot of damage to buildings because given enough time, they will chew through concrete. They can damage stored foods, whether it's in a barn or something of the sort, consume an awful lot of it, or foul it with their urine and feces so that it can't be used. They do a tremendous amount of damage, directly and through the diseases that they carry. I'm not a specialist in those things, but having the rats around is a real problem, clearly. Yes.
So given that this is an affliction globally, how are other cities dealing with it? Are there any innovations that other cities have discovered?
I don't know. And the bits and pieces that I hear indicate that everybody is struggling with this. Part of the problem is that the solutions that's, well, the one solution that really seems as though it's the one that is most likely to work, requires an initial financial outlay, and that seems to scare people off. Many people seem to, to be willing to simply complain and accept it. They may call up City Hall once in a while and complain, but how many, yeah, I don't know how many changes result from that.
This lady in back first.
Hi, thank you again for speaking to us and educating us. I think a lot of people in Evanston don't know all of this information. For example, I had been told at one point that squirrels eat the top holes and rats only do on the bottom because they don't like to climb up. And so that would be something good to know. And the fact that some of the garbage cans are not closed and are, the boxes are sticking out. If people were more aware of that, I think, through education, if we were better educated, we could better control the rats,
Yes.
especially the food source, as you were
Yes,
speaking of.
yes. So you're, okay, so there were a couple of things there. Your comment about rats chewing holes in the bottoms of the receptacles, the trash containers, and squirrels coming in through the top, there is certainly some basis for that. I don't think I've ever seen a squirrel go in one of the holes down low. I have seen rats climbing around up on top. So they at least at times will do that. Now, my observations are mostly based on what I see in the alley behind my house when I'm driving my car in the evening. So small sample size. It would be great to have a lot more information about that. The rats are smart. They're very adaptable. I'd be awfully surprised if they would not take advantage of the holes that are up on top. Sure, they prefer to be down on the ground, no question. But that, I'd be awfully surprised if that's the only way they'll get in there. Now, is there something else that I should comment on? Yeah.
Education.
Right. So, yeah, so a couple of 4 or 5 years ago, my wife and I gave a talk to the Evanston City Council. My wife is Terry Horton. She teaches at Northwestern and actually knows more about reproduction by small mammals than I do. So anyway, we gave a brief presentation, some of the same slides, and there was a lot of interest and concern. And I think my sense is that perhaps that with, that is one small part and lots of pressure from other sources, the current program in Evanston has become less heavily dependent on putting out poison and is being much more active in looking at things like using liquid nitrogen and dry ice to kill the rats. Looking at other things. This program of the availability of replacement tops for trash cans seems to be getting around. But you're right that by and large, there's still very little knowledge about these things. So some level of public education probably would be helpful, both about the things that do seem to work and those that don't really do much.
We have one more question in the room and then a bunch on Zoom. So
Ships coming into Chicago have lines, and lines have protectors. My first question is, which direction are we trying to keep them from going on the ships or coming off the ships? And the second one, are they required by law to have that? Is there any advantage to?
Well, so the answer to your first question is, I think, yes. We don't want them going either way. And there are all sorts of things that come in on the ships. We've got specimens in the mammal research collection at the museum of Central American mouse opossums. They're related to the opossums that we have here, but they're tiny little things. And they came in with bananas from Central America. So all sorts of things come in on the ships and in the trucks and whatever. Yeah, I don't think that's a significant factor at this time. We have so many rats in the city that, you know, bringing in a few more 100 or 1,000, it probably doesn't make much difference at this stage. What was the second part of your question? Oh, I have no idea.
So we've had a few discussions online, as well as some remaining questions. Some people were asking about having birds of prey to help control the rats, or having other urban wildlife as predators to control the rats, which would be great, except that then they are eating the poison if there's also poison
Yes.
in play. And so there's been a discussion online about that. There's also been a discussion about composting in different types of bins that might be more rat-proof than others, or changing your compost bin to try to get something more rat-proof than others. So there's a bit of a discussion of that. There was one question, what does rat feces look like? But somebody has answered that, a little torpedo about a 1/2 inch to an inch long or something like that. I think it said, if I could.
Quarter of an inch or maybe up to 1/2 inch long, black.
Okay.
Little pellet looking sort of thing.
Right, so that's what we'd be looking for. One unique question is that somebody had heard that cat urine might deter it, just the smell of cat urine, kind of like the mint.
So, yeah, so I have heard that. I've also heard that coyote urine can scare them off. Coyotes do eat rats, including adult rats. They can be very effective. Some breeds of dogs are extremely good at catching rats. One of the people I work with at the Field Museum has a dog that loves catching rats. He takes it out. He's part of a club of people who have rat catchers, and they go out into the alleyways and have contests to see whose dog can catch the most rats. He thinks that these clubs should be encouraged and subsidized, and maybe. Anyway, so maybe the urine would help chase them away from a given location as a overall program to reduce the rat population. That's asking for a lot.
There was one other question about, in California, there's a moratorium on anticoagulant rodenticides, but there's a carve out for agriculture. Is this issue different in cities versus the countryside? How would it be possible to control access to food sources by mice and rats when the food is the crops in the field?
So my understanding is that in the agricultural areas, the primary problem is not with the corn when it's out in the field, it's when it's in the silo, in the barn. It's concentrated, and the rats can feed on it there and be protected. They don't like to go out into cornfields. So in that case, part of the argument that's made is that first, that it's hugely expensive. If you've got a big population of rats living in your corn silo, it can ruin it completely. You lose your crop for the year because it's contaminated. So a strong case can be made that something's got to be done. In that instance, they argue that it's a very controlled circumstance. It's not like putting out anticoagulants throughout an entire city. You're concentrating in a very limited area. And that argument apparently has carried weight in some states. I don't know of data that have been collected on the impact of using anticoagulants in that situation on owls, for example. Do the rats that are sick, do they crawl out and stumble around on the surface of the ground and get eaten by something? I don't know.
Well, I think that's it for us.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming and for presenting to us.